Welcome back to the Polish Podcast, where we embolden women in their faith and work. I'm your host, Jane Doerman. Your work matters. And at Polish Network, we provide the connection you crave, professional development you deserve, and the gospel that you need. Join us each episode as we deep dive the themes we're exploring in the Polish community, featuring a variety of guests sharing their perspectives and experiences as Christian working women. Well, whatever brought you here today, we are thrilled that you joined us, and we hope these stories spark a renewed sense of purpose and embolden you to flourish on your leadership journey. Have you ever found yourself facing a monumental decision, uncertain about the best way forward? Wondering if the challenges ahead could be tackled more effectively with the support of others? Well, today, we get a front row seat as we explore a story that shows us the profound impact of leading with collaboration. A story of unity, resilience, and transformation. Imagine facing the daunting task of merging two distinct communities, each with its own history and traditions and identity, into one unified whole. How would you navigate the complexities of such an endeavor? How would you lead in a way that fosters unity while honoring the unique contributions of each group? And even more, how would you inspire others to join you on this journey of collaboration and shared purpose? Well, today's guest, Pastor Stephanie O'Brien, lead pastor of Mill City Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota, faced these questions and more as she proactively embraced the idea of leading with collaboration. But Stephanie's journey to this pivotal role was no ordinary path. Born into a ministry family, she wrestled with questions about her calling, questioning whether she was truly prepared to follow in her family's footsteps. However, it was her unwavering commitment to following the guidance of the Holy Spirit, coupled with the passion to understand the relationship between spiritual formation, which she studied in seminary, and the intricacies of human psychology through her undergrad studies, that truly set the stage for her remarkable leadership journey. This, combined with her entrepreneurial spirit, culminated in the founding of Mill City Church.
We started Mill City with the sense of called to a specific part of Minneapolis, and to join in what God was already doing there, because we believe God's already doing things everywhere, and that our job is to be the people who look for what that is and figure out and discern from the invitation of the Holy Spirit what our role is in that. And so that's how Mill City began. The name Mill City comes from the nickname for Minneapolis, because it's the flour mills and the sawmills that the city began on Mississippi River. And so Pillsbury and General Mills, you're welcome. You're welcome. Minnesota. Also Target, just so everyone knows, Target also comes from Minnesota. So you have a lot to be thankful for.
Wow. I am so honored to just be in your presence.
Everybody knows about the Mall of America when they come to Minnesota,
Yes.
But honestly, skip it and just go to one of our nicest super Targets, and you'll just have a joyful experience. I love Target. So all that to say, we ended up moving, like a bunch of us moved to the city and started a really a community that was focused on Jesus, but also how to live out the good, the good news of Jesus, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And there's been a team of pastors the whole time. At the beginning, there was 2 of us co-pastoring, and now I'm the lead pastor, but I have 4 other associate pastors leading with me. That's how I prefer to lead in team. And this theme of collaboration that you guys are in this month has always been a part of my DNA and a part of what I get to do as a leader. It's a privilege to do that. Not all pastors can afford to have other team members, much less maybe even that there's people around to do it. And so we are very much focused on our mission is to love our community in the name of Jesus. And we're very much intergenerational church, very Jesus-centered is kind of the way I would describe it. And honestly, it's been amazing. It's been very hard, but I love it. I love being a pastor, and and I think that says the most about my community, because a lot of my peers, my colleagues are really struggling. But I would say that Mill City is just an incredibly thoughtful and passionate and intentional group of people. And I'm super honored to be able to be one of their pastors.
From the genesis of Mill City Church to the present day, Pastor Steph has navigated a path defined by collaboration and purpose. Her experience as a vocational pastor also recognizes a significant challenge that not only resonates with the local church that she leads, but it also relates to the broader landscape of the Big C church.
And so I think where we are at right now in the church Big C is a challenging time. But I find it to be an opportunity because what we're affording is a clarity between cultural Christianity and people who really desire to follow Jesus. And so having more people in church buildings is not necessarily a measurement of success of the Jesus following part. Yeah. So I am here for the challenge and feel that God put me in this role at this time with the wiring that I have for this moment. But there's going to be a lot of church consolidation. And so it's going to look different in different ways. But another word that people use for it is merge. Other times church consolidation is just a church will close independently. And then those folks will all scatter to different churches and sometimes not to any church at all. So this is not brand new, but it is unusual to lead through it at this time since it's still pretty new. And because every single situation is going to be very different. And so for our situation, this might be under the larger category of a merger, and those of you who are business minded are thinking like, oh yeah, mergers and acquisitions. And so, yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, one organization is absorbing the other one. There's other times when the two organizations are trying to make a kind of combine. And that's not what we did. We were absorbing their church, and we chose to use the word adoption as a way of talking about the fact that churches are a family system. And so that there's no perfect words to talk about what happened, but that we were, as a family of Mill City Church, choosing to welcome in the family of Elam Church.
Now, as Pastor Steph points out, church congregations are familial bonds, which is a significant observation to understand when you're uniting two separate church families into one. While Mill City Church was an established part of the community, Elam Church came with a rich history and a legacy spanning over a century.
Elam is 135-year-old, or was 135-year-old, historic Swedish Baptist church. It started by Swedish immigrants who couldn't get their horses across the river in the snow to the other Swedish church, Swedish-speaking Baptist church downtown. And there were 6 women who were thinking, we think a church needs to be in our neighborhood that we can actually get to, where we could worship God in Swedish. And so these 6 women started a small business, textile business, to be able to raise money to start the church. And they did. And people still talk about these 6 women and how the church wouldn't be there if it wasn't for them. Wow. And they were pioneers. I mean, they were trying to figure out how to,
for sure.
They're immigrants, and they're trying to navigate the language and all the things. And so, I always think of, there's so many things that are challenging for immigrants, but it creates a real amazing skill in entrepreneurial work. And, it's like out of usually needing to, but so our church, Mill City, is connected with a network of churches that historically is connected to this Swedish group of people. And so we're in the same church network, having, we don't think about being Swedish, of course.
Sure, absolutely.
We started 15 years ago or 16 years ago, and they started 135 years ago. And so today, we were in the same kind of network of churches. And so we've been in relationship with them from the beginning. They were always 6 blocks down from the school that we worshiped at. Like many church plants, when we were starting, we worshiped in a public school. It's not typical to still be in the school at year 14. That's not typical, but that's, we're in a very expensive part of the city. It's gentrifying, and it's just, and we also we valued not spending a lot of money on a building. So there's other things we could do ministry wise. So the relationship with Elam, we knew since the beginning 15 years ago that they were in decline, but it wasn't a rapid decline. Churches have life cycles. That's a normal thing. A lot of times churches can go through multiple life cycles, just like, and the life cycle can often be about the productive time of an adult. So 40 to 60 years. And then the church needs to recycle, re-engage a new life cycle. And so Elam went through many of those. And so there was the chance that they could have come into a new life cycle, but it didn't seem like that was going to be the case. But there was never a moment that we at Mill City Church thought we were going to adopt them. That was not on our radar. But to support them, absolutely. I mean, maybe there was in my thoughts, and when I learned about mergers, I thought, I wonder, but besides a wondering and never a conversation in our church. And to this day, I still feel, I was telling somebody yesterday, I can't believe this happened. But so it was when COVID happened, their decline rapidly increased. And so that is very common for what happened. And at this time in North America, the average church is only back to 70% participation of what it was at before COVID. And so if that's average, then it can be worse. It can be better. Only 12% of churches, recent study that came out right now, are considered stable in their growth, meaning they're not growing or declining. 12%. And 55% are declining. So that's a pretty big number. And what's really, what has changed the most in the last few years since COVID is that stable number going down, and more of them are growing. So we're in the 22% of quickly growing churches at Mill City, but it's very unusual. So we were growing coming out of COVID. And so because of our relationship, the short version is that some of their leadership talked to me and to our leadership, and we said, should we discern together?
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Pastor Steph and I talk through this discernment period, as well as the leadership challenges she faced through it all. In honor of Women's History Month, let's celebrate the remarkable women in your life who are making an impact through their work. Join us in supporting the mission of Polish Network. Will you join us in reaching our $15,000 goal? You can make an incredible impact by donating to our campaign today. Your contribution directly fosters spiritual connection, fuels professional growth, and combats isolation for women in the workforce. Support our ongoing mission by giving your gift at polishnetwork.org/give, or you can click the link in our show note. Together, let's create a supportive space where women flourish. Join us in emboldening women in their faith and work today. In navigating this delicate merger or church adoption, Pastor Steph exemplifies not only collaborative leadership, but also a commitment to transparency and wisdom. With a deep understanding of both growth and decline within the congregations, she and the other leaders embarked on a journey of discernment, engaging not only with the leadership of both congregations, but also with the people that they led.
We entered into a discernment period for many months where both communities, and we did experiments and we tried different things, but the question was before them. It wasn't what should we do? It was, do we feel called to do this, which would be that Elam Church would vote as a community to close their church, but their vote would also include an asset transfer to our church, all of the buildings and vehicles and things that are theirs, and a very clear ministry transfer, meaning all of their people can make a fast track membership to our church, and ministries that they have, we would discern which ones would go on and wouldn't, and that we would receive all of those things. And so everybody knew that that's what we were talking about, but there was still like a lot of whatabouts, we called them. And so there was a lot of time to talk about this and discuss this. Now, I think it's an important moment to say right now is that this is not how a lot of churches would have approached this. They would have kept the leaders in the room. They would have kept the leaders in the room and said, it's kind of comes down to a couple people who really want to do this or don't, and they're going to push it forward. And I quickly realized that in this scenario, I was going to be kind of the steering leader of it all. And I just wasn't willing to do that. First of all, I don't want to lead a group of people to a place they haven't discerned they're supposed to go.
Sure.
That sounds terrible. And I trust my community, and I've come to trust Elam's community. And I was able to say to them with all sincerity, the future of our churches is in you. God is going to speak to you. And I don't want you to think, what does Pastor Steph want you to do? What does Pastor Paul or any of the other leaders? I don't want you to think what you prefer. Actually, your preference here is a secondary question. What do you think God is asking us to do? Because there were some sacrifices on both ends. And there were some concerns, valid concerns. For us as Mill City, we were able to be very nimble. And I often said agile because we didn't have a building cost. However, this was a moment where a building that's worth probably $6 million was about to be offered to us with zero debt. So when we say our value was not to spend money on a building, we meant we didn't want to raise $7 million to build a building in the city. And
Wow.
so do we have to pay money to keep the upkeep of this building? Well, absolutely. But what we were really concerned about was how much it would take to just get the infrastructure or to redo a warehouse or whatever else people were doing. We never started a conversation about doing that because it seemed just so obvious that finding millions of dollars just for infrastructure was not in our DNA as a church. And so it was just, incredible. And there was no debt. They had kept everything from the physical structure really well. There was any deferred maintenance was light fixtures, aesthetic, carpet, paint. No, major things. Those will come now. But the fact that they were keeping that up was just showing their commitment, their dedication. And it took an incredible amount of courage for them to have this conversation because technically they were not at a point where it was a forced conversation. And I think that was really important for the collaboration that we had because anxiety is not a great thing to have when you're trying to discern. And everybody did have some anxiety, but because it wasn't something that either church had to do immediately, I feel like both, like many of us could talk to our anxiety and work through it and then come to the table as our whole selves. And then some of my job as a leader was to speak to the anxieties and say, hey, I don't know what's going to happen, but here's some things that we could do. If we go forward with this, here's what it could look like and leading people that way. But after the discernment time, we decided to vote.
After all the discernment and the questions and experiments, it all came down to a congregational vote. An opportunity for two separate church families to decide if merging into one entity was their next right step. And needless to say, the results were miraculous.
It was just really profound to see two groups of people go through this process, a lot of emotions on both ends, different kinds, both people, and to vote both churches over 90% yes. And I don't know about you, but when I look at the church today, a group of Christians voting 90% on anything, much less two groups of Christians, especially something so significant, is I think I will put it in the miracle category. I would
agree with that.
Overdo the miracle, but it was the Holy Spirit bringing a bunch of people to this place, and I had the opportunity to say to the Elam community, who we now call the Elam alumni, multiple times, like, if you're voting yes, we're actually asking you to join us. It's not just, yes, I'll give my church over to this other one. This is not a good plan without you, actually. Service wise, his experience that you have in the neighborhood, all of that, like, that's incredibly valuable. And I am hoping that you'd at least say, I'll stay for a year. And so far, almost everybody has been there for this entire first year. Just a couple of people. The people who left did not leave in a huff. They left with intention because they were driving already far, or they needed to be with their family, or something like that. And so it's been so important. And something interesting about our part of the city, it's the oldest part of Minneapolis. That's why this is the Mill District, where the first businesses were in Minneapolis. And so there's a very much a subculture in Northeast Minneapolis of the legacy and what's been around for a while, and we can only trust things that are there for a while. And so it's hard to explain, but anybody who's in Northeast Minneapolis would know what I'm talking about, that there's like, you're not really from here if you weren't born here kind of vibe. And so it's interesting to think that for my church, a 15-year-old church, led by a lady with tattoos, how could that church communicate to a neighborhood like that also has a lot of people with tattoos and new gentrification and whatever, that they're serious about loving this neighborhood and being, committed? There's no other, besides adopting a legacy of something that's 135 years old. I don't know any other way that you could communicate that so clearly. And so we made that commitment that we were adopting their legacy. And so to us, that meant that we talk about it. We tell the story. There was never anything visual in any main part of the church that told the story of those 6 women or the Swedish people that were courageous enough to start the church. And now that's on display. And I think that's the kind of adopting a legacy that it creates a rootedness that we couldn't manufacture. And so it's been incredible. So that's what happened. And it was, the most collaborative process I've ever been a part of in my life.
Yeah.
And, which means it's one of the hardest, but the reward of seeing people. Well, it was incredible to see people. This is discipleship, right? Like learning to listen to God. I mean, we can have some classes on stuff, but at the end of the day, like this is the real stuff.
It's an action. Yeah.
Most churches had been teaching the skills of discernment, and that's why it worked. And to discern together builds trust, and we all built that trust. And so, I don't want to, it's been a year now since we've been together, and it's been amazing. The church has continued to grow. And so at this time, we're at about 150% growth from where we started before COVID. Again, so that's most churches are at 70%, back to their 70%, but we're at 150% above our 100%.
Oh my gosh.
That's 170% more than most churches are right now. And that's nuts. And so and it's not because somebody got good at marketing. I'm going to tell you that right now. Like nobody's like figuring out like hacked Facebook ads or something. Like,
okay.
I think, well, first of all, I really do believe it's the Holy Spirit. And then I think people are drawn to healthy people collaborating.
Yes. Amen to that.
I mean, I think people are like, oh, that seems right.
Yeah. I want to be a part of that community. They're not getting hung up on like trivial things. It's like big picture thinkers. Yes, it's hard. I think we call that out. Yes, there probably was a lot of discomfort through the process, and you leaned in and you let the Holy Spirit lead the way. And that's what's like, I sit here, I got chills just listening to you talk, I have like my foot in the door in church world as well. At my local church, and like a lot of the things that you brought up, that's like amazing. It's amazing that you got 90% to say, yep, let's do it.
And like, now it's this like beautifully intergenerational church that, again, you couldn't manufacture. You can't.
No.
Most churches have some gap somewhere in age, and we like don't have any gap. Like,
are you serious?
It's wild right now. And then, I mean, we'll have to get back to what you actually want to talk about, but
it's okay. Keep going.
I feel like I'm like walking backwards into the future, trying to help bring these people together and help them listen to God together and bring them together after we got together. And then, quickly remodel the aesthetics of a building while everyone's at the school together. And then we come back in. And then I realized I bumped into something while I was, leading people walking backwards into the future. And that was Gen Z. And I don't know how to explain this, Jane. I don't know why, but there are so many 18 to 25-year-olds just all of a sudden.
Really?
It's bizarro. And the reason it's significant is because when you're 18, guess what? You get to choose now if you want to go to church at all and where you want to go to church. So, we got gobs of kids under 18 too. Well, they're here because mom and dad are here,
for sure.
Then the gap that a lot of churches end up in is that 18 to 25-year-olds, because that's when they start to choose. Our high schoolers handfuls of them have started to stay at our church, even though if they're in the area still. I mean, you can't force them to do that. And it's not their parents doing that. Their parents aren't like that. So it's crazy. So there's no gap. So there is like a baby being born like every week. There's a funeral happening every week. I'm being a little bit every month. Let's go with month. Like we actually are having about one funeral a month because there were so many of these amazing saints who I almost feel like they were just wanting to make sure they could have their funeral in their church building. Like,
oh my gosh.
They were ready to go.
Yeah, sure.
They're like, get me out of here. I saw this happen. I'm ready to see Jesus. Let's do it. And of course, if I was talking to the group of seniors, I would talk a little differently about that. But
absolutely.
I feel like we've got, there's a baby dedication, a wedding, and a funeral every month, if not more.
Oh my goodness.
And that's just not typical. It's so unusual. And so I wish there was a formula that I could tell everybody we did, because it was definitely just when you follow what God's asking you to do, you have to trust him. And guess what? Sometimes you trust him and numbers are not the outcome. Sometimes it's other things, but maturity. I mean, I keep telling our church, like, there was never a plan to be a big church. And in the city, for the city, we are now a big church. And so I said, but we are okay with growing wide, but we have to stay committed to growing deep in relationships with God and our discipleship and our sense of mission to the outward community. So we talk a lot about our up in and out focus, our up relationship with God and our in relationship with our community, and then our out relationship with the world God loves. And we have to keep those priorities and push them deeper, and it's hard to do that when all of a sudden there's all the growing pains of, we had to go. I mean, 18 months ago, we went to 2 services for the very first time in 15 years. And now we're at 3 in 18 months. So like some people are like, well, my church does 8 services a week at 4 locations. Okay, that's fine. That is not my life. And
that is not
an urban church to go from like comfortably having 150 people on a week to 550 is bizarre. And there's no parking, and it's amazing and beautiful, and it's a mess. And so I just think I'm so pleased with I love Gen Z. They're so fascinating to me, and they're so wholehearted, and they just bring their whole self to things, and not as jaded yet like my millennials. And so I'm so grateful to have them at the table, and I want to keep figuring out how they can speak into this, because they're not the future of the church. I mean, they're the church now, just like our 6-year-olds. So like, how do we give them that space? But anyway, wild story. So that
is wild. Like,
but it's just wild.
It is wild. And it has God written all over it. He works things out in ways we would never imagine. He does things, it's stories like that I listen to. It sounds like, you say like, and then we got a building, and then this happened, and this, and it's like, if it feels effortless, because you're like, this is not me working at doing the things. You said there was no marketing,
nobody's strategic plan would have had this out.
No strategic plan. It was just God opening the next door, and your active obedience as the leader to move forward and to shepherd your team along with you and the congregation. I mean, that's a lot of people. And people are complex. We're beautiful and complex and complicated. Yes, exactly. And it's just leading it all. Man, like, I gotta ask, do you ever like struggle with like imposter syndrome, or just like, who am I to be leading this? Or how do you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think in an honest moment, every leader struggles with that. The most important thing is that I have such a great team, and I trust that. Here's another bizarre. Everyone on my team before COVID is still on my team.
Wow.
And that's not normal.
No, it's not.
Because of me. So I think that God's showing me from beginning to end that I'm not alone. And so I haven't felt alone. And that is just a silent killer of leaders. That's for sure.
It is
that loneliness. So, but yeah, there's moments where I'm going, what in the world? I mean, I don't have speaking as a woman leader, like I don't have any friends that are women leaders who are leading something like I'm leading. I know some men, and I have leaned on those guys, but like, there's the imposter syndrome gender wise, and that comes in. I think, I've heard people say quotes like, I forget where it comes from. I just heard somebody say the quote the other day of like, it's being a leader it's challenging for when you have failure, but it's also really challenging to handle success. And I think I feel the weight of the responsibility to handle the thing that God's doing here is really profound. And so I feel the weight of the responsibility to continue to lead people to follow God in this, and not just settle into some other mode that we might be tempted to settle into. And I feel the weight of the financial burden. Our budget went from $700,000, which I already thought was like so much money, to $1.3 million overnight. And it's just wild. And you just go, what in the world? And so I feel the weight of that. I think I feel a lot of grief, particularly around the parts of my, like, I do actually like love my new job. My therapist was really funny the other day. She was like, you have a totally new job. And then she got really like she was going to get really sensitive with me. And she's like, do you like your new job? And I was like, actually, I do. Like, thank you for asking. I do like it, but I'm sad about the parts of my old job that I don't get to do anymore, because like anything else in life, you can't do all the things. And so I'm sad about not knowing most of the people's names, and I barely spend any one-on-one time with congregation members at this point. My team needs to do that, because my staff and their spouses are the size of a small church. So in my mind, so some people would be like, that's, 25, 30 people is a small group. I'm like, that's a small church. Look it up.
Yeah.
I have to focus on them. And I feel the distance from being able to be a part of people's lives in the same way, but I'm so glad that other people get to do that. I'm so glad that other people get to be in their lives, and because I'm not in the way, but I'm sad about not having that same connection with with the people, with the congregation in the same way. I'm thinking a lot about like how to be a person who's approachable, but I can't be so accessible. And that's just, there's a lot of grief there and loss. And then just like everybody else, like even though the church was growing during COVID, there were people that left partly because they moved to like the Great Reassessment. And a few people that left just like anyone else to go find a church that was fit for them, which I think, to be fair, I just actually think that was fine. There was just like a good, let's just like a little bit of a reset, because if Mill City is not the best church to help someone follow Jesus, then I want them to go somewhere else. That's fine.
Sure.
There's only one church of Jesus. It's just in different places, and some of them are healthier than others. So I think Mill City is a healthy church, but it's not for everybody. And so when some people made a switch to closer to where they live, or to a church that focuses on an area of justice that they're more passionate about, that's really focused or something, I celebrate that, but I still miss them, and it's sad. And, you know, the Great Reassessment meant a lot of change, that the ambiguous grief that I think we all have. So I do feel that too, but I feel the weight of the responsibility, and then it's almost like there's so much responsibility when you lead an organization that grew so fast. And then the moments where you're really anxious is when you realize like you actually can't control like any of it.
No,
it doesn't feel good when you try to get your head around like, okay, I got to do this because I'm in control. That doesn't go anywhere good.
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
It's a tough one to go to the actual place of surrender where you're like, wait a second. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
More control about what's going forward than I did about what just happened. And just have to trust God in that. And so I'm grateful for my friends and peers that come alongside me. But absolutely, it's very challenging. It is the hardest thing I've ever led anyone through. And that's saying a lot after COVID. That was the second hardest thing I've ever led anybody through. So it's a lot to have those in the same 5 years.
Yeah, no, that is a lot. And I appreciate your honesty in that space, that grief, that, because I think, I don't think I would have ever labeled it as grief, but I guess it is, like, as you said, you were moving forward, you miss parts of your old role that you were, in the smaller church. And now that you've grown, your role has evolved. And with that comes, like you said, the weight of that responsibility, and, managing your team well, and managing the congregation well, and your time well, and like making sure you're also taking care of yourself a little bit too throughout the process. And it's something I think all working women go through, in the essence of like, we feel like we got to balance all these things. And it's like, okay, find something I think you and Joe talk about on your podcast a lot. It's just like, what rhythms are you establishing in your life that will sustain where you are now in your leadership? Because what worked yesterday doesn't work necessarily for today.
And somebody else won't work for you because of the kids or whatever is happening in your season of life.
Exactly. And I see freedom in that. Something I've been thinking a lot personally through this season is how do I find freedom in my limitations type thing. We can't do it all. But I appreciate the honesty in how, you felt like it's really cool to see how God works. And there's some grief that, there's this tension that we just walk in. There's all these emotions within us and, trying to listen to it. What are my emotions telling me? And like, how do I lead well? And something else you had mentioned, I kind of just wanted to circle back to, is you mentioned loneliness as a leader, which is something I think all of us have felt. It's there's a loneliness epidemic going on, currently in our culture. And I don't know, how do you think we as leaders can navigate this area of loneliness well, or like what can we do to maybe make a move through that?
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing that I think, pray for people in your life to come into your life. Okay. That actually works.
Number one.
I have made very specific prayers, and I've had very specific people come into my life. But the second thing that I think that is like the most important thing is to get comfortable with what I call friendship DTRs. DTR stands for defining the relationship. And when I was a younger millennial, when I was a millennial who was younger, I'm an elder millennial, but
yes,
we talked about that all the time. It was like this funny thing about like when you're dating, like, oh, is it serious? Are we exclusive? And you know what? It's awkward in dating and it's awkward in friendship. But at times, like, you just got to, especially as working women, you just got to talk to somebody and say, like, you might know you got a connection, you got a friendship, but what can we do for each other here? Let's not over promise and let's not under promise. Let's not overcommit. Let's not undercommit. Let's just say like, hey, so instigating this conversation, I realize it's anxiety producing for a lot of people, but to say, hey,
Yes.
I have just so enjoyed your friendship. I feel like I'm learning a lot from you. I feel supported by you. And I hope I can do that for you too. I'm just wondering, like, is there a way that we could connect regularly and intentionally to offer support for each other? And if you don't have time for that, please tell me that. Or if that doesn't feel like what you need right now, please tell me that. Then I will continue to look for people to do that. But I need that in my life right now. And it will bring a sense of tetheredness to your life. And the cool part about that now is that those people don't even need to live near you, because you can be on Marco Polo or on Zoom. And
Yeah.
I mean, Joe and I are on Zoom or on Marco Polo every day.
I love that.
Minutes, almost every day. And we live 15 minutes from each other. We can go a month without being in the same room and we still feel connected. And I feel like we sometimes get it into our minds is that the loneliness is only going to be able to be assuaged by somebody who's always there for me, who's in my physical location, who understands my life stage, and who,
Yes.
like that, the loneliness is not going to be solved by one or two people. It's going to be a group of people who you can identify with and connect at different levels. But what I think holds people back is that confusion about the expectation between them and what people can offer. And, I've had those conversations with people. I've asked people to mentor me and they've been like, I don't have time, and like, it's not easy to hear that. Like, it's not easy to hear that, but it's the right thing to do to put it on this. We don't have time to kind of like, dance around if we're going to be there for each other. And so, I call them like your 2 a.m. friends. Like, if you don't know who your 2 a.m. friends are, and I'm talking about people that aren't related to you, then you need to pray about that, because it's not okay that only people who have the same DNA as you or who are adopted into your family are the people that are there for you. That's not going to work. It's just not going to work.
Sure.
So you got to have other people, and you don't need a ton of them at the 2 a.m. group.
That's true.
A couple people. And then you got to know, like, who are the people that are my go-to people to be able to process how hard it is to be a mom? Who are the people that I can talk to about being a church leader? I'm not a mom, but I am sometimes that person for moms. Like, because I'm not going to be comparing it. I'm not going to be, and I'm just like, hey, let's talk about it. And I get to know their kids so I can listen and I understand who they're talking about and why they're, feeling the way they do. And dads too. I do that for dads too. So I just think we got to figure that out. So if someone was asking me how to not be so lonely, I'd be like, you have to have courage to have these conversations with the people around you and pray that there's more, that God shows you who they already are, because they're already there probably, and brings those people into your life in the times, because this isn't what God wants for us. Loneliness is not part of God's plan. No. Solitude and prayer, that's different, but not loneliness. And so I just encourage people to take courage and do it. It's very tough, but we've got ourselves wired into thinking that belonging is something that happens to us, but it's something that you have to seek. Belonging is not something that happens by accident. You have to seek it, and you have to create it around you. And you have to know that sometimes when you try to do that, your efforts will fail, and that will be very hard, but the outcome is worth it.
We're going to pause for just a moment here to share with you an opportunity to grow in your leadership with Polish Network. And when we get back, Pastor Steph shares with us insights from one of her 2 books and gives us some practical tips in our decision-making process. So hang tight. Are you a working woman looking to elevate your leadership this year? Polish Collaboratories could be your next right step in moving forward in your leadership development. Polish Collaboratories are small groups modeled after executive peer groups, yet available to working women at all levels of leadership. Collaboratory members dive into leadership training with a faith-forward perspective for 12 months. This is your opportunity to tap into diverse perspectives, conquer challenges, and achieve your goals in a united sisterhood. New groups are launching in 2024. We want you to be a part of it. So go to polishnetwork.org/collaboratories to learn more. You have two books, Stay Curious and Make a Move. I still Stay Curious is on my to be read list, but I read Make a Move. I really appreciated your just approach to godly discernment in decisions. I know for someone, for me, I struggle with anxiety too. And point of tension or triggering is making decision after decision. And I can get locked up inside.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Don't even get me started. So if you could, for us, really quick here, could you share a little bit about what Make a Move is about? And then something I noticed within your story and even just in our conversation here today is you really you practice what you preach. You embody this make a move posture in the decisions that you make and the discernments that you make. So could you share with us just a brief overview of your book and what it's about, and then how making moves helped you and your team make decisions throughout this whole adoption process?
Yeah. Well, the greatest affirmation that a communicator can get is that you actually do what you say, what you're talking about. So thank you for saying that. I do try to have integrity with that. If I can't do it, I shouldn't say it. So, and I can't do it, but like, if I'm not going to pursue it, the truth is I can't do consistently anything really. So yeah. So I think Make a Move. So the subtitle is How to Make Decisions in a Disorienting World. And I wrote the outline for that book and that title and had it submitted in a book, process to write it with my publisher in 2019. And so
I was
like, okay, I'm ready to write this book in 2020. I'm going to write this book. And so I ended up writing that whole book during the pandemic. And I was like, what kind of sick joke is it that I put how to make decisions in a, disorienting world? Cause I didn't have any idea what disorienting could actually be.
No, I don't think any of us thought that.
Yeah. And so, the book does not talk about COVID very much, maybe mentions it a few times. I had already the book was when I think about writing like a sermon or a book, it's already within me. So I was just getting out what was in me. Was it influenced by what I was experiencing COVID? Yeah, but only because it gave more fodder for the reality of the need to do this. The premise of like the idea of discernment and making a move is that you can't make 10 moves before you make the first one. Like you and anybody who had a strategic plan for their organization or their personal life in January of 2020 had to throw it out. So it doesn't mean that always happens. It's just a sense of, if, especially in our lives of faith, we are listening and responding to God as we move forward. I call it discernment through movement. You can only see so much until you get a new vantage point and you move forward and move forward. And so, I advocate in the book for experimenting. So thinking of things as an experiment rather than a single decision. Like before you even make a decision, the first decision is, will I try something to learn more? And so very practically, in the book, I talk about vocational decisions. So say you're thinking that you don't want to stay in your job. You could make a call like quitting when it's a bad day, but not advised. So, or you're just like, I think I want to change my whole career. Well, let's see, what's the question, define the question, and then figure out what it is you're actually wondering about, an experiment, and then define the steps for the experiment. What would you need to do to do this experiment? And then review what you learned from it. Because like the scientific method or anything else, the learning happens with the experiment. You can only sit in a room and talk so long about what would happen in that Petri dish until you actually put something in there. And you might have a hypothesis, and that's fine. The only way to move forward on it is to try it. So if you're in vocational, I'd say, well, what's an experiment? Well, an easy one would be an informational interview on that career that you're wondering if you might be interested in. That doesn't look like putting yourself on LinkedIn as looking for a job. It doesn't look like anything. But like, hey, does somebody in my friend group know somebody who's in electrical engineering because mechanical engineering is not working for me and I want to make a switch? Well, I wouldn't suggest going back to the kind of education to make that switch until you know. Sure. So an easy experiment would be to have an informational interview and so on and so on. And so it ends up being like the movement through that experiment. As you're moving through those steps, you're paying attention to what's going on around you, but you're also listening to God at the same time. And that's the way that you can move forward. Is there value for sitting in a room and waiting on a word from God? Totally. And I've done that with other people. I've done that for myself, and I do that with my community. But usually it's not going to be the Lord speaks about 10 steps down the future or the 10 steps to get there. The Lord usually speaks about what you need to do tonight. So, and maybe gives you a word to carry you through the next 10 steps, but not a plan. So if that's the case, then you have to leave those times of prayer and listening and make a step in a direction towards what you felt like God was saying. And that step might be an emotional one, intellectual one, or a physical change. And we absolutely use that process in this with the church, bringing people through those steps and experimenting. So we called them experiments. We said, okay, one of the experiments is going to be Mill City is going to host a worship night at this church building. It's going to be run by us, but the Elam alumni or the Elam at the time are invited. So they had a chance to experience in their building what it's like to experience Mill City's culture. And it wasn't a perfect experiment, but it was an experiment, and then they came over to the school and joined a normal worship service. Those kinds of experiments. We had experiments where we did prayer walks and people listened around the neighborhood. We did experiments during that time that got people together to actually just set a timer and listen and then write down what they felt like God was saying. These types of experiments were when I say we had a discernment process, it was inviting people into those types of practical experiences and then giving very clear spaces for them to share when they felt like they might be hearing something from God. And I always tell people, I always say, I might be, we're not the angel Gabriel. So just, and so I think that was what we did. And, it's the book. I wrote the book very much towards individuals because, people are usually reading about themselves, not as it wasn't written for an organization to use as a method, but it's transferable in that way. And as leaders, we need to model it in our own life. If you aren't living your own life of discernment, you can't encourage a whole group of people to live that way. So to your point about it earlier, because that's my way of being, I could lead other people towards that. And I don't do it perfectly, but it's better than just, I just couldn't imagine some of us going and just making this decision and then letting everyone know. That just sounds terrible. So it's not easy to do the discernment through movement, but I think I would say it's probably easier than the other option, to be honest.
Yeah. No, and I love that. And like I said, I loved the book. You really give practical steps for us to take in this decision-making process or the experiments that we try. You make it very approachable and very accessible. And that's what I really appreciated about it. And I appreciated even more hearing your story and just how you used, how you just shared the experiments, the small experiments you did, bringing the congregations together in different formats, different events, and how you just really, you involve people in the process. You were not making decisions alone. You were making with a community of people and observing how these experiments were affecting one another. And I'm just really, I'm going to say right now, we are going to link your books in the show notes, obviously. And you guys, if you are just struggling with decision fatigue or wanting to discern better, I'm going to highly recommend you check out Pastor Steph's books here. So, it's just been such a treat to hear about your leadership perspective and your story with how God is leading you and the church that he is growing in Minneapolis. So yes, thank you. Well done. Well done with leading with collaboration.
Thanks for the opportunity to share the story. It's encouraging to me too, just to, obviously I'm in the day-to-day all the time, but it's pretty incredible to celebrate what God's been doing and our ability to join him in this collaborating with each other, but also with what God's doing.
As we pause for a moment to reflect on the rich insights from Pastor Steph, we invite you to stay tuned for our Ask Me Anything segment. And this special part of the show will be serving up your curious questions on leadership and literally anything else you want to know about our guest. So don't go anywhere. Have you been searching for inspiration to elevate your faith and work journey? Well, we've got an exciting announcement for you. Introducing the Polish Network blog, your go-to destination for diverse perspectives on faith and work from remarkable female writers. We want to embolden you in your faith and work, and our blog is a great place to start. So visit polishnetwork.org for a dose of encouragement. Check it out today. Well, welcome back, friends, to the Polish Podcast. We hope you're enjoying this conversation that we're having with today's guest, Pastor Steph. Now, it's time to add a dash of spontaneity and a sprinkle of fun to the show. It's time for Ask Me Anything. So, Pastor Steph, this is how Ask Me Anything works. This is a chance for us to kind of peel back the layers, get to know the woman behind the work and the quirks behind your expertise. And we have a couple questions here that we've curated for you, and we're just going to follow our curiosity to know more about you. So, are you ready? Are you game?
I'm ready.
All right. First and foremost, March is Women's History Month, and I want to know, if you could have a conversation with any influential woman from history, who would it be? And what question would you ask her?
Oh, man. There's so many, but I'm honestly, I'm going to give the answer that I bet a lot of people would, is probably Michelle Obama. Because I read her books and I just felt like we're friends now. So I can think of women in history that go way back, but I just want to ask her more questions based on what I heard about her story. So it would probably be questions that sounded like, tell me more about what this was like, And
for sure.
I felt like she was, and you can listen to her read her book. And so it feels, so regardless of her family's politics, that wasn't really the topic. It was her life and how she was an overcomer. And I don't know, it's pretty cool.
That's cool. I'm going to have to check those out. I love a good memoir. So I'm going to be adding, you're making my list longer for all my to be read. All right. Question 2. What advice do you have for young women who are aspiring to become pastors or leaders in their communities?
Well, obviously I have a lot of advice for them, but
yes,
for this segment, I would say, get as many experiences as you can watching other leaders, and don't assume that you can learn only or even more from watching other women, but make sure some of those are women. But pay attention.
Yes, for sure.
Sometimes you're not just looking for somebody who represents your gender or even your ethnic background, but sometimes your personality type. One of the leaders that really helped me see what kind of pastor I could be was a Black guy who's older than me, who has a more apostolic personality. And I mean, we are completely different. Nobody would say that him and I are similar, but there was something that was unlocked by getting a chance to be led by him. And so knowing that you can have parts of who you are called to be in ministry unlocked by being around leaders that are different than you and similar to you. And so I would call that the idea of it's hard to be what you can't see, but
sure,
it's not just seeing with your eyes. It's also the personality of the leaders and how they lead. Maybe you're more soft-spoken, so it's helpful to be around a leader who's more soft-spoken, but that might be an 80-year-old guy, so.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice. I've never thought of it that way, looking for the personality type that you resonate with too. That would be really good for us to take to heart for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then my last question, since 2020, technology within the church has become a big thing. And I'm always curious, how do you incorporate technology and digital platforms in your ministry to connect with your congregation, especially in this world where it's increasingly reliant on virtual communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is going to be an ongoing conversation intentionally. So the first thing I would say is I think we're constantly evaluating that, because this world is moving quickly with technology and with how people connect and how people communicate. And so instead of saying, here's our perfect plan for this, it's we're always evaluating it. The guys on my lead team yesterday were just talking about this, but we've decided we're going to keep valuing a really well done online live service, because we know there's people in our community who can't physically make it. And there's people who, when they are sick or when a kid's sick, that ends up knocking out weeks sometimes of a year. And then there's the actual conflicts they had, like traveling to see family. So it's amazing how connected people still feel when they're joining. And we've decided to do it live still. So they literally know that this is happening right now. and they feel like they're a part of it and they keep the rhythm in their life. So it's like, okay, I would be here at 10 o'clock. I would be here at 9, 10:45, whatever. But right now I'm here at this time. So I feel like that's part of it. And with social media, our church has social media accounts and we use those a little bit similar to the website where people can get information because, millennials and younger typically go to Instagram for information, not to websites. But we also put a little bit of our personalities up there. But I've definitely taken to my own personal social media, and one of my associate pastors who preaches the most, he does too. And so a lot of people from our church will follow us there and interact with us. And I even think like I post on other people. When I see people from church posting things about their kids and stuff, I'm always commenting and always liking it.
Oh, that's cool.
I mean, because I do. It's genuine, but it's also like, that is a connection. And so I'm not just waiting for them to respond to me. That's what an influencer would do, right? Like I want people to comment on my stuff. I see it as a two-way experience with my congregation as much as possible. That there's a couple places online that we've been able to use the media to be able to connect. So, there's a closed Facebook group that you have to say you're a part of our church. So there's still 500 people in there, but they connect and that gives them freedom to connect with each other. And then we use WhatsApp a lot for our church. So,
interesting.
All the groups, if they ask, we give people, empower them to communicate the thing that works best, but we encourage groups to choose WhatsApp because it works across all types of phones and you can create a group easily and add and take people off. And so we've got groups of people. There's 80 people in like a pickleball group. I don't know. And they'll be like, we're going to play pickleball at this time. And 80 people, that's the way they can get a spontaneous group of 4 really quick when they find an open court. I'm not in the group. I just hear about it. So we kind of empower people to use those types of platforms as much as possible. But we also have some people we call them the paper people, especially from the adopted church. And so we've got a list of people who get a paper copy of most things still. So, and then when we do print something like a fall guide, people are like, ooh, a printed out thing.
It's like a novel thing. Yeah.
Paper printed things are novel. And I keep it that way.
No, but thanks, Pastor Steph, for sharing with us a little bit more about you. And here's the thing, friends, we want you to be a part of the conversation. We want your burning questions, your curious musings, your wild wonderings about our guests. So if there's something you've always wanted to ask, now's your chance. Go to our website, polishnetwork.org, and submit your questions there. Be a podcast MVP and send in your questions today. So, Pastor Steph, looking back to when you first merged your congregations to what it looks like today, what is the greatest leadership lesson you have learned, especially when it comes to leading with collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's to find the balance between going too slow and going too fast. I can tell you exactly what that is. But I feel like it was one of my roles to pay attention to the fact that if we moved too quickly, that was going to be too hard. But if we didn't move quickly enough, there was a different type of pain for people who are hanging in the ambiguity of a decision. And so keeping the pulse on that, I just wouldn't have ever thought about that quite before this process, how important it was to try to do the best we could to stay in a pace that made sense for most people, even though it felt too fast for some and a little slow for some. Mostly it felt too fast for people, to be honest. But that was some of the wisdom we were given. And in the end, I think it turned out really good because the longer people are kind of idle, the more things come up that are distractions from the actual question.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good insight to that whole process of really just keeping the pulse on how fast things are going. And yes, a lot of different opinions and perspectives are involved, but keep moving forward.
We started the conversation in May of 2022 with the leaders. We didn't bring the conversation to everybody until September of 2022. And we voted yes by December. So that discernment process was September to December.
Wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it felt fast to some people, but all that I talked about was able to be done in that time. And kept the sense of urgency that was needed for people to choose to participate.
That's so good. Well, I just really appreciate you sharing your story with us and just all the things that, you have such wisdom, I think, in leadership. And like I've said before, I really just appreciate the work that you do. Before we wrap this up, are there any resource recommendations for like leadership development that you would recommend for the listeners that are tuning in today?
Yeah. Well, I think most relevant to what I talked about, I'm sure there's listeners whose churches, even if you're not leading in a church, are considering something like this. There's a book called Better Together, and it's by the Leadership Network group. And so I'm sure there's books with that same title about every subject, but if you look for the one the subtitle is Making Church Mergers Work. And we would have been in trouble if we didn't have that to give us some guidance. We didn't follow everything. So, I mean, that's my big one, is to encourage people to do that. And then the other recommendation I'll give is my BFF and partner in crime, Joe Saxton's book, Ready to Rise. I think it's a great book for any women leaders and in any setting, anything that you're stepping into. Because I think even the timing of that book too, it came out right as COVID was coming. It felt to me it made the Ready to Rise like almost connect with the idea of like a phoenix, like rising from the ashes. So I think, I think that, unlock your inner phoenix and read Ready to Rise by Joe Saxton.
Yes, unlock that inner phoenix. I love it. Well, Pastor Steph, how can people follow along with the work that you do or get connected with you? Yeah,
I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is just Pastor Steph. And then my church, you can find it at melcitychurch.com if you're curious. And we've got blogs there where you could see how we were leading people in real time through that, through our blog and stuff, and just see a little bit more about what's happening. But otherwise, that's the best place to find me. And you searching my name, Stephanie Williams O'Brien, will bring up the books wherever they're sold.
Excellent. And we will be sure to link to all of those books and your church website and your Instagram account in our show notes. Thank you so much for just coming on the show and sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Today's conversation with Pastor Steph has challenged me to consider how I'm utilizing my process of discernment to inform how I lead collaboratively and how I make decisions. But how about you? What's your key takeaway from today's conversation? Here are 5 more of mine. Leading with discernment and transparency is not the easiest thing to do, but it is the best way to do it. Prayer cultivates a heart of wisdom that propels us to action in our decision-making. When leading through change, it's important to keep a pulse on how fast or how slow the process is going. Learning happens with an experiment. Loneliness is not God's plan, and we need to find the courage to define the relationships we need and mutually support each other in our leadership growth. Well, let's compare notes. I want to know what your key takeaways are from our conversation today. You can share those on our Instagram post for this episode and let me know what's resonating with you. As we draw near to the end of this episode, I want to extend our deepest appreciation to those who make the Polish Podcast possible. The Polish Podcast is supported in part by a grant from Coca-Cola Consolidated. Special thanks to Pastor Steph for encouraging us to make a move in the art of decision-making. To our listeners, thank you for your unwavering support. Your engagement and feedback drive us to create content that resonates with you. A heartfelt thank you to the Polish Network for cultivating a community where working women can thrive and connect. Thank you to White Oak Christian Church for your partnership and generosity in the production process of these episodes. And if you're feeling the weight of loneliness in your leadership today, remember,
we've got ourselves wired into thinking that belonging is something that happens to us, but it's something that you have to seek.
Be sure to stay connected with us on social media and our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you could, please rate and review the Polish Podcast as well. Until next time, this is Jane Doerman signing off. Keep moving forward and remain emboldened.